I'm Dr. Patrick Dinar. I'm an orthopedic surgeon, and I want to share with you some of the reasons why nutrition is something you should really be considering as part of your recovery if you're planning to undergo surgery or you know somebody who's planning to undergo surgery. So I want to cover kind of the why nutrition is important at a high level, who it's important for, how you can address nutrition, or perhaps why you haven't heard about nutrition, or at least surgeons aren't talking about it as much as they should be. So the first of all is, why is nutrition important? Well, surgery is a stressful event. So your body is asked to undergo a significant event where somebody is cutting you open and you have risk during that time. And the goal of that surgery is to heal. But in particular, your body has specific needs. For instance, your protein requirement after surgery doubles. You get stress response, hormones are released, stress hormones, etc. And in order for your body to adequately recuperate, you need to have all the nutrients and supplies to be able to recover in an appropriate manner. And the better you're equipped, the more likely you're going to have a good outcome. If you think about this, this is not a new or sort of grand idea. For instance, athletes do this all the time. If you take an athlete who's training for a very stressful event, say a marathon or a big football game, they'll prep the night before. They'll prep weeks in advance, in fact. And that typically consists of eating well, having adequate hydration, having protein going in, protein for recovery, and then having a carbohydrate load the night prior, particularly in the endurance athlete. So the same thing applies to surgery. So now, who actually needs to use nutrition? Well, if you look at this, there's a couple of interesting things. Number one is, a lot of people think they have good nutrition and they don't really have it. So if you look overall, it turns out about 50% of patients, if you look at data, are actually considered to be at risk for malnutrition. That's 50% of patients undergoing surgery. And those who have malnutrition are at increased risk of complications, including increased hospital length of stay, increased cost to the hospital system, and increased complications like infection, poor wound healing, etc. And another thing is the time of recovery. So in particular, what's interesting is that people typically overestimate their function or their nutritional status. So one interesting study that was done even in teenage athletes out of Texas looked at this and found that 64% of patients undergoing orthopedic surgery actually screened positive for having risk factors for poor nutrition, and those can impact their recovery. But when you ask people, would you like a nutritional advice, they say no. In other words, they think they're doing better than they are. Now, when you actually look at some of the implications of what happens with surgery, even in healthy individuals, if you take healthy males, so mid-age, and you bed rest them for 2 days, which is often required after surgery, some immobilization, either because you're recovering from like an orthopedic surgery, where you have a sling or you have a brace, or simply somebody has an abdominal surgery and they have to be down for a few days, you get muscle atrophy. And that leads to strength loss, and that's going to slow your recovery. So even in healthy individuals, if you just put them in bed, they get decreased muscle. And that happens with just a couple of days. The same thing happens in astronauts. That's why one of the big things that has to be thought about for space travel is how you maintain muscle strength. If you look at another stat, 5 days of bed rest equals 5 years of aging. So we'll get into some of the details later in some other episodes I want to do, and how you can reverse some of this. But the basic concept, just on a high level, how can you intervene here is you want to try to use two major things. The first is you want to try to increase your protein load. Again, your protein requirement doubles after surgery. So on average, it's about 1 gram to 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight that need doubles after surgery, because you need all those building blocks to heal. You need to heal your skin, heal your body parts, your muscles, etc. So it's really important to have increased protein load. And there's specific amino acids that are really important in recovery, like leucine and glutamine, that I'll go into the data of in subsequent episodes. So that's one of the biggest foundations, is protein levels. The second thing is a carbohydrate load prior to surgery. So there are studies that simply showing that taking a carbohydrate load, low in sugar, but a high dose, like 100 gram carbohydrate load the night prior to surgery actually improves recovery, decreases complications. Some studies even say it improves pain after surgery. The reason for that is that if you tell people not to eat, which we often do prior to surgery because we're worried about aspiration. So we're worried that if people have food in their stomach, they aspirate. That is, food goes back into their lungs, and that creates a big problem. Well, so we tell people not to eat or drink after midnight. What actually happens? People have a meal, say around 5, 6 o'clock. They don't eat after midnight. Then they go to surgery. Maybe it's in the morning, but maybe it's later in the day. So we actually look what actually happens, the measured NPO time, or nothing to eat after nothing per oral, as we call it. It's about anywhere from 13 to 16 hours, depending on when the surgery is done. So now what happens about that? Go back to this sporting event. You've told somebody, okay, you're going to go run a marathon, but you're not going to eat for 12 to 16 hours prior to that event. Well, what happens on the inside of the body is now your body goes into starvation stress mode. Okay, so then you apply another stress on top of it. And rather than being able to adapt to that stress, your body's like, okay, we got to flood the system with glucose, or move your glycogen, start getting glucose into the system. Well, insulin resistance goes up, and now your glucose level spikes even higher. So that's what leads to those complications after surgery. So you can offset that by having a carbohydrate load or the proper energy on board going into that event. Now, there's some movement even to narrow those windows to particularly try to address this problem, but that's really facility by facility. The third aspect that can be really considered is if you look at fine details, there's several studies that show that certain vitamins can be appropriate for surgery. And essentially what you can do there is certain areas like vitamin C, vitamin D, et cetera, can be helpful in surgery. So that kind of gets into the fine details, but the core is really protein, where you can't get rid of the muscle loss, but you're trying to decrease that slope or decrease the length of that decline and then come back up quicker so you can get a quicker recovery, because it's going to happen. You're trying to lessen that. And that's important for people who want to get back. And then you're trying to do a carbohydrate load as well to really optimize or charge somebody up for having their surgery. Why don't you hear about this more? So the reality is that if you go to medical school, as I did, you get very little education in nutrition. And so I think the biggest factor probably is just the lack of knowledge actually among surgeons. So surgeons like myself who are actually aware of this topic, it's because they're self-educated and just take an interest in general health. I was somebody who was interested in supplements for my entire life and was, an athlete and looked into how can I optimize my performance, and then carried this forward into trying to optimize the performance or outcomes for my patients. So that's a big factor. The second thing that I think is really probably a big reason for this is, besides the lack of education for surgeons, is that the time pressure that surgeons are under. So increasingly in healthcare, there's this conflict between decreasing reimbursement and having a need to be more efficient. I face this on a daily basis, and quite honestly, a lot of patients are asking more questions, which is good, as they should, but it puts a line of time pressure on us. So when it gets down to it, we were like, okay, here are your options. Here's your surgery. We're taught PRQ, procedures, alternatives, risks. What are your questions? And unless somebody asks specific questions about this, we may not even go into the nutritional aspect. So we're not educated, and therefore we're not thinking about it. So I didn't get any education on nutrition in residency. Yeah, I got very little in medical school. So 4 years of medical school, 5 years of residency. I didn't get anything at that point. I had to be all self-taught. And then you have these huge pressures that really don't give you the appropriate time to research this on your own, and then spend the time with your patients to really explain it to them. So that's why you see a lot of surgeons thinking about this. But I think in summary, if you ask why should you consider optimizing your nutrition before surgery, because most people probably underestimate how big of a problem this is. They don't quite understand the implication or thinking about it in the right terms. And you're trying to do something with surgery where you're investing in your health. We're talking about hopefully a lifetime proposition where you have, if you do have to have surgery, say on your shoulder, your knee, or have a hernia repair or anything like that, you want to have that done one time. So you better try to get this right that one time, and you can have a great surgeon and you can be in good health. But if you want to do everything you can, you should really optimize your nutrition, because there's no downside. It probably benefits everybody. And how you do that is, if you're going to do nothing else, pay attention to your protein intake and your carbohydrate load. And to learn more, you can check out our link below, CompleteSurgicalNutrition.com, for specific tips that can help you recover from your surgery better. So I hope that information is useful for you, and wish people the best in their recovery from surgery.